I don't think I've been so conflicted about a VR game before. On the one hand, we have a game that's clearly aware of and successfully executes a few impressive little displays of VR input. And on the other hand, we have a game that on a core mechanical level feels quite unfinished and lackluster. The things it does well, it does very well, but they are countered equally by what is done badly. For this reason, I can't lean toward any one conclusion, so instead, I'll highlight the good and the ugly of Hubris, by which point your own intuition will have long since told you what to do, if you're able to notice it. Obviously, from the footage, it's artistically a very nice, all-around visual experience. Environment, assets, and actors all look good. More importantly, these visuals are coherent and stable, which helps set the standard for a believable and immersive world. Many other games would miss the point here by having fancy rendering techniques which only properly display from several in-game meters in front of you. Anything further than that might have shadows filter, blur, or vanish as you move away, the textures load and shift quality, assets popping in and out of existence or switching through different quality levels, undermining the player's immersion and their sense of place with endless visual corruption, reminding them they're in a fake game world the developers are clearly struggling to hold together. Hubris has none of this, or at least any I noticed, which is so refreshing to see in today's environment and is very much appreciated. The environment and asset detail overall is excellent. Everything stands up to close scrutiny, with flourishes of artistic detail and care to be found everywhere you look. The overall standard is high, as VR deserves and needs. The sound effect quality keeps up with the visuals, never exceeding them, but never detracting from them either. There is a curious lack of music from the entire game, however, which in itself is not a bad thing. After all, these things don't have to be included if nothing is to be gained from it, but a surprising choice nonetheless, especially for an adventure game with this level of presentation. I can't be sure if the lack of a musical score is a deliberate omission by the developers. My entire playthrough did not feature any event that having a soundtrack behind it would have interfered with. They have their reasons, I'm sure, and while a good soundtrack would have certainly enhanced things, having no soundtrack is preferable to having a bad one, which can destroy the lasting perception of any media if poorly handled. VR-centric traversal in Hubris is mostly handled well. Climbing feels intuitive and smooth, with exception of some weird gripping behavior now and then. The clambering, in particular, works excellently, and I hope other VR games which feature climbing will imitate and iterate on what has been done here. The swimming feels fantastic. It's a polished implementation that had me immediately engage with it as naturally as you could hope, responding to my movements with elegance. It worked so well for me, in fact, that I wished there were many more swimming sections in the game than there were, and this particular area of gameplay and interaction could be expanded upon. Using one's body input to supplement and enhance basic movement is infinitely more interesting than using a button or thumbstick alone. For a while, I didn't quite understand why I liked it so much, but after some reflection and playing through the game a second time, I believe it's because of how granular and nuanced the swimming is. It's a shocking realization of how severely hamstrung we are by a thumbstick, button, or touchpad-only movement now that we have technology that allows our bodies to get much more deeply involved. Having such intricate yet effortless natural input from your movements translates so well in these sections of the game. Without any exaggeration, it feels refreshing and liberating to engage with, and I want VR devs to seriously explore more of this kind of input to supplement, enhance, or even replace standard ones, which I now consider outdated and are holding us back. We need to start getting over binary buttons and look to what else we can do with the amazing tech we have. I enjoyed the swimming so much, I couldn't get enough of it, and I hope to see this kind of input in many more forms in many other games. A huge thumbs up to those involved with its programming. You did a great job. Interspersed through the game are small but appreciated cool VR-centric interactions, which in isolation are perhaps only a nice novelty, but all together during a playthrough have a significant impact on the experience. The game's various crafting stations and occasional button require an entirely physical interaction appropriate for virtual reality. Except for the main menu, which I suppose can be excusable for now, all in-game input completely avoided the lazy default of using laser pointers on a screen to interact, which would otherwise have made them boring and disappointing. There are these little one-off story interactions which, while simplistic to do, still make very elegant use of VR input, one of which in particular really impressed and inspired me. I won't spoil it, even though I want to, because I think it may inspire you as it did me, but to hell with it. It's too important not to show you. Here's your spoiler warning and timecode to skip to. This section, where you play Doctor for a moment, lent itself beautifully to VR and immediately sparked my excitement and inspiration for how this kind of event could be expanded upon with more depth and used in other contexts for some very, very interesting and cool possibilities 2D gaming couldn't hope to emulate. Imagine a grand-scale multiplayer VR game with your typical class roles. One of those roles is the classic medic, but rather than just throw healing packs by pressing a button or tossing them around, you instead have a medkit carry case which you physically have to open and take tools from. Then, you have to make sure your teammate stays still as you go through a procedure of carefully removing shrapnel from their avatar, disinfecting, closing wounds, bandaging, eventually allowing them to fully regain health once you're successful. The effect and speed of how they recover could be determined by how good you are at pacing yourself and staying calm and accurate with your movements. Immediately, we have a whole new dimension of compelling gameplay utility and skill that is only possible in VR, and isn't just a lazy, ill-suited equivalent input translated from flat-screen games. I have absolutely no doubt there are a plethora of people who would enjoy playing competitive multiplayer warfare games, but are not so good or care about aiming and attacking others, but may relish the chance and excel at alternate roles like my medic example, which asks for a whole different set of skills and may be hyper-engaging and rewarding for them, where pointing and clicking alone otherwise wouldn't be. Apply this same idea to other unique class roles with their own contexts of skillful analog VR input in a meaningful setting, and I hope you can feel the inspiration sparking within you too. An entire new subset of nuanced player skill could enter the equation for overall team success in these games, beyond just aiming and reflexes. Team Cyborn didn't need to make this scene interactive in such a VR-centric way, but they clearly wanted to, and bothered to do something unique and creative rather than just fall back on lazy, tired defaults or have it play out in a cutscene. I hope other developers can see this and understand why bothering to make these extra efforts are extremely important for the cascading ripple effect it has on the art form. Each spark of inspiration leads from one thing to another, and we all would advance and benefit as a result. I would have never thought of any of this myself without this scene taking place in Hubris to show me it can be done, and thus inspire me. I can't make games, though, so I hope those that can, and are competent at doing so, might also be inspired and take up the mantle where I cannot. And finally, for the good, it's worth mentioning a nice little consideration the game makes for your controller position, which I've seen no other VR game do, and definitely think it should be copied. When your avatar's hands collide with an object in the world and cannot keep moving, it doesn't have a seizure like other games. Instead, it stays put where it logically should, and a ghost visualization of your real-world controller location appears through the object, so you have an exact reference point at all times. I thought this was very neat and worth highlighting to support my earlier mention of the devs really considering the unique VR play experience more so than others have done. This and the other little things make a big difference and are appreciated. Alright, now for the ugly. The biggest black mark on the game, by far, is the terrible immersion-shattering AI. It is bad, plain and simple. It functions, barely, but this is not good enough for a game with this overall level of presentation. The AI will see and sometimes attack you with its given ability, but there is zero semblance of actual intelligence, awareness, personality, anything. All ground-based hostiles path to you in the most rudimentary and obvious AI-programmed way. They'll stand around like statues, oblivious and unreactive to anything, even if you shoot at them or their ally in view right next to them. They'll often still not react. When spotted by the humanoids, they'll path to you in straight lines with those stiff animations and might occasionally do a little thoughtless random dash somewhere. Otherwise, they're supposedly sentient beings that behave like oblivious robots whose scripts are barely functioning. There are these flying drones that don't fare much better. They can sometimes be a bit more of a threat and may fly into positions to attack your flank when you retreat to cover, sometimes. Otherwise, they float around, unmoving, unreactive, and allow themselves to be destroyed without resistance very, very easily. The pink mines you encounter just drift very slowly toward you. Completely useless and immersion-breaking practically and thematically, only being of any danger if somehow you miss one and it floats to you from behind, which is quite difficult to make happen, owing to most of the level design not being open enough to allow this. The underwater squids are the same, but look slightly better despite the brain-dead non-sentient behavior due to their more visually interesting animations. This brain-dead AI behavior is not only disengaging, detracting, and deeply boring, but immersion-shattering to boot, and conflicts heavily with the game's presentation. No amount of suspension of disbelief from a player would be enough to compensate for how poor and unfit for purpose the AI in Hubris is. I've lived for long enough to say with confidence that artificial intelligence for games has seen a massive regression in the last 10 to 15 years. We were doing better, more interesting and complex behaviors in the PlayStation 1 era from the 90s, with CPU power back then being a fraction of what the average modern CPU has today. It is beyond me why such an abysmal AI standard is considered passable and still used as often as it is today, and even more bewilderingly, so readily excused by players, even when the experience is aiming for an overall high-fidelity presentation. High fidelity is not only for visuals. Setting a precedence for something as fundamental as the visual detail of the world means that the accompanying parts need an appropriate minimum standard to match. All perceptual and interactive elements must keep up with one another and be implemented cohesively, else the illusion shatters to the player's and the game's detriment. This kind of AI quality is inexcusable, considering both the game industry's collective historical experience with programming AI systems and the sheer computational power we have at our disposal today. The AI in Hubris is a failure, and not engaging in the slightest to interact with. The presentation and narrative for Hubris seems very unfinished. You're given next to no idea about who or what anything is or why it might matter. The tone is near non-existent, the pacing is very disjointed, and the game abruptly ends with no sense of achieving anything with meaning beyond a brief, hollow spectacle. The game begins well with a concise, intriguing introduction that leaves one curious about the world around them and eager to know more. And the voice acting quality starts well enough, but soon after the quality falls off a cliff.
Get up, man. You are safe now.
More on that in a moment. Your player character is a member of an organization called the Triple O, which is short for the Order of Objectivity. You appear to be on a spaceship, and after going through some kind of training preparation, which is supposed to continue on a nearby planet, things happen, and your ship crash lands into the planet you were due to arrive at, I think. You emerge from the wreckage and later come to learn there has been an invasion or assault from the bad guys of the hour who are referred to as the Uron, who apparently are alluded to having some kind of poison they may spread on the planet for reasons you'll never find out and see no evidence of. Their name is all you'll know about them for the entire game. Similar to your own organization, you will begin and end the game none the wiser about anything said or done. As just mentioned, the tonal quality of voice acting declines heavily after your arrival on the planet. Most lines of dialogue you hear will come from a companion named Lucia, voiced by Diane Weller, who is presumed to be the pilot of the ship you crashed in and survived with you. She doesn't accompany you in person, but instead remains at the ship and remote pilots a drone that guides you through the levels and delivers exposition. Her voice line delivery can only be described as bizarre.
That's bad.
Tonality quickly becomes more and more disjointed into farcical territory, delivering lines of dialogue in a manner as if she's an alien put into a recording booth attempting to do a comedy imitation of what human speech patterns might sound like if she'd never heard them until just before recording.
Wait, my sensors tell me there is something alive behind that wall. The signal is disturbed by the power fields, but it's clearly a humanoid, maybe multiple. I'm Triple O Captain Lucia. Now, tell me, who am I talking to?
Duac is my name. I'm the main engineer of this terraforming expedition.
So, you are working for the Vion Company.
That's right.
Then tell me, Duac, what happened here?
Well, an invasion, that's what happened.
An invasion? Can you give me more details?
Her voice delivery was so opaquely ham-fisted that I thought this was deliberate, and later in the story I'd find out why she spoke this way to you. But no, it seems to be played straight all the way through. So my next theory is that perhaps she hadn't been given any direction on what was happening during each scene she read for, and just settled on whatever tone she fancied doing in the moment, and whoever was in charge just threw it in the game. The few other voices from other minor characters were a little better. They were tolerable, generic, unremarkable, nothing much to say there. Very, very strange. So all in all with Hubris, I never had any idea why I was doing anything, what anything meant in a larger context, or what the ultimate goal was. I learned nothing about the organization I was supposed to be a part of, or of those we were fighting. After playing through twice now, I have no idea what the world of Hubris is, or trying to convey. I don't understand whatsoever why the game is even called Hubris. Nothing happens or is alluded upon that invokes connection to this game's name. I can't help shake the feeling some huge setback, or many, happened during late development which resulted in the narrative nothing that we got. Game performance is a very variable and subjective matter, so I won't linger here for too long. I've a very good spec PC. I aim to play at 120 FPS at the highest settings on my Valve Index. There are only 2 graphics toggles which barely made a difference in the game anyway. The praised prettiness of the game comes with a cost, of course, but this cost seemed abnormally high relative to competing games' visual output. Hubris is a performance-heavy game for current hardware, more so than I feel it should be from my experience with other VR games of high fidelity. There is one other thing unique to Hubris, though. It's one of the blurriest VR games I've ever played in a headset. Anything more than 5 meters away was smeared and indistinct like a watercolor painting viewed up close. This blurriness is not conveyed on the desktop footage you're seeing in the background. It's a headset-only issue. It wasn't difficult for me to tolerate due to how visually stable the game is overall, but it was still uniquely blurry compared to any other VR game I've played. Super sampling via Steam barely seemed to help here and was untenable due to the added performance cost. The blurriness seems to be something they've done with the visual settings of the engine rather than resolution alone. A post from a user on the Steam forum for the game mentioned it may be due to the developers targeting a device with different lenses than the common LCD ones, and he had the same blurriness until switching to a different headset where he then reported a clear picture. But on that same thread there are conflicting reports, so take that as you will. Either way, what you're seeing on the background footage is a much clearer image than what I was seeing in the headset during play. You have been warned. Visual experience may dramatically vary. Circling back to my sentiment at the beginning of this review, Hubris really has me split down the middle unlike any other VR game to date. Team Cyborn clearly get VR and make several successful attempts at creative physical inputs with a level of polish and innovation we as users should be praising and supporting, so these things more and more become the norm. And it's an actual traditional game in VR. A very flawed one by today's standards, but to have an actual game with a journey, characters, its own theme and setting, a quality, artistic originality and cohesion to it, a clear beginning and end, kind of, and isn't just another janky tech demo or asset flip, is sadly still a rare treat to have for PC VR, where most of the software still seems to be stuck in perpetual adolescence. But where Hubris shines, it casts an equally great shadow. Outside of its well-done VR-centric interactions, as a game experience to be engaged and interacted with traditionally, it is a greatly lacking minimum viable product, let down enormously by the AI in particular. Narratively, I view Hubris as a failure. The plot and characters do not compel, intrigue, entertain, or even make sense. There is a distinct lack of tone to it all, despite the excellent detail of presentation attempting to compensate. However, the world and setting doesn't feel completely lifeless. I can clearly sense that behind the result of what Hubris is, are remnants for a VR game far more ambitious and compelling than what we ultimately got. And echoes of that intention remain in all the impressive little details to be found throughout its short runtime. Something happened during this game's development which necessitated a large direction change and potential massive scaling back of their scope. That's my feeling. It's stable, but clearly unfinished. And I wonder if having to maintain the high standards for visual fidelity had anything to do with that. After all, having showed the visuals off publicly a long time ago and setting expectations, backtracking on that would have been a PR disaster. Even if reducing the visual standard would have allowed them to make a more complete and interesting game. Perhaps I'll see if they fancy an interview sometime to chat more about this. Stay tuned. For what Hubris offers, I don't think its asking price of around £35 is worthwhile. But I personally don't regret paying full price for it either. For me, the special effort Team Cyborn put toward the unique, polished VR interactions in a proper game setting with a strong artistic identity vindicates that asking price, in spite of the glaring flaws and failures which let the game down. I believe they clearly have the technical skill and care for the art to pull off some amazing things with VR in the right conditions. The sparks of creative brilliance demonstrated in Hubris, at the very least, communicate this clearly to me. Maybe some of the larger issues I've mentioned can be patched to lessen their impact, we will see. And I don't know if Hubris will see Team Cyborn the success they need to better realize their ambitions with another game. But I hope they get another chance to prove themselves and really wow us with their creativity in VR. But what are you going to do, dear viewer, in light of what I've told you? Spare yourself the platitudinous thoughts. It's all distracting white noise that will take you further from your honesty. You've already known for a long while what choice you'll make. You've long since filtered the information relevant to yourself and subliminally picked up on key visual details that communicate the essence of the game to you. You know what you want to do and what's best for you. And no matter what you hear or see otherwise, follow your intuition just as I did, and you'll have no regrets. Thank you to those who choose to support me and help to keep my channel going. If you would like to support me, you can find links in the usual places. I ask for no more than £1 per creation. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again.